Keanu Reeves, one of the most admired actors in the world, is known not just for his blockbuster movies, but for his humility, compassion, and quiet acts of generosity. Years ago, Keanu took part of his fortune and built a hospital, not for publicity, but to ensure that people from all walks of life could receive medical care with dignity, regardless of their financial status. Recently, troubling rumors began to surface. Keanu received anonymous letters from patients and staff describing mistreatment and corruption inside the very institution he created. So, without alerting anyone, he made a bold decision. Dressed in a faded jacket and jeans, he rode his old black motorcycle to the hospital and walked through the front doors. Not as the owner, but as an ordinary patient. What he witnessed was worse than he imagined. A desperate mother, holding her feverish baby, was turned away by a cold receptionist. An elderly man, clutching his chest, was ignored by passing nurses. Meanwhile, wealthy patients were escorted straight in, no questions asked. The man overseeing this chaos? Dr. Javier Fuentes, polished, arrogant, and completely devoid of empathy. He mocked a young man with a bleeding hand, dismissed urgent cases, and treated the vulnerable with contempt. Keanu stayed silent, observing everything. But the tipping point came when Dr. Javier sneered at Keanu himself, dismissing his symptoms without running a single test. Later that night, Keanu revealed his true identity to the hospital administrator. Shock swept the room. Calm but firm, he fired Dr. Javier on the spot and announced sweeping reforms, mandatory empathy training, anonymous abuse reporting systems, and a commitment to serve everyone equally. Weeks later, the hospital was transformed. Patients received real care. Staff worked with pride, and as Keanu walked the halls, a small boy tugged at his hand and said, "Thank you. The doctors are nice now." With a smile, Keanu replied, "Taking care of people is what really matters." Keanu Reeves had always believed that real change starts with action. So when he began receiving anonymous letters from patients and employees describing abuse and discrimination inside the hospital he built, he didn't send lawyers or managers. He chose to see it for himself. One chilly evening, Keanu threw on an old leather jacket, a pair of faded jeans, and rode his black motorcycle across the city. No security, no assistance, just him. He entered the hospital through the front door, like any other patient, quietly taking a seat in the waiting area. No one recognized him. The receptionist barely looked up when he asked for a consultation. She glanced at his clothes, frowned, and handed him a slip of paper. "It's going to be a long wait," she muttered coldly. Keanu simply nodded and sat down next to an elderly man who was visibly in pain, clutching his chest, and a young mother rocking a baby drenched in sweat. Moments later, the mother stood and approached the desk, her voice trembling. "Please, my baby has a high fever. He needs help." Without even looking, the receptionist snapped, "You'll have to wait your turn, or go to a public clinic." Keanu's heart sank. This wasn't the place he envisioned. He watched as the rich were ushered in like VIPs, while the poor were ignored and humiliated. His eyes narrowed as he saw a sharply dressed man walk in without waiting. The staff smiled and said, "Dr. Javier is expecting you." Sitting in silence, Keanu took mental notes of every injustice. He wasn't just witnessing a few bad moments. He was uncovering a broken system. He realized then that the people suffering the most weren't just sick. They were invisible, but not to him, and he was ready to find out just how deep the rot went. As Keanu sat quietly in the crowded waiting room, he observed every detail with calm focus. But what he saw unfolding before him would shake any person to the core. Across the room, an elderly man struggled to breathe. Clutching his chest, he weakly reached out to a nurse. She glanced at him with mild annoyance. "Sir, I can't stop everything for every little pain," she said, walking past without a second look. Keanu clenched his jaw, but remained seated. Moments later, the young mother returned to the desk, pleading once again, "My baby's fever is rising. Please help us." The receptionist, still uninterested, sighed dramatically. "If it's that bad, try a public hospital." That's when Keanu saw him. The man in the tailored white coat and designer shoes, Dr. Javier Fuentes. With a cup of premium coffee in hand and a smug expression, he walked the halls like he owned the place. But what made Keanu's blood boil was how the doctor treated people. When the mother approached Dr. Javier directly, desperate for help, he scoffed. "This isn't a daycare," he snapped, waving her off. Her child whimpered in her arms as she returned to her seat, eyes full of tears. Minutes later, a teenager entered, holding a blood-soaked towel over his hand. The receptionist pointed him toward Dr. Javier's office. But not long after he entered, the doctor's mocking voice echoed in the hallway. "You came here for that? It's just a scratch." The boy walked out, humiliated, holding back tears. Keanu stood, approached him gently, and offered a clean handkerchief. "Let me help you," he said quietly. The young man looked up, stunned. "Who are you?" Keanu smiled. "Just someone who cares." Watching it all unfold, Keanu realized this wasn't just arrogance, it was systemic neglect. The poor were dismissed, the vulnerable were belittled, and the staff, afraid of retaliation, said nothing. He now understood this problem was much deeper than one man in a white coat. But Dr. Javier would be the first domino to fall. Dr. Javier Fuentes wasn't just arrogant, he was dangerous. To him, the hospital wasn't a sanctuary for healing. It was a stage, and he was the star. His pristine white coat, expensive cologne, and designer shoes made him look the part. But his heart told a different story. As Keanu Reeves watched quietly from the waiting area, he witnessed how Dr. Javier created two classes of patients: the wealthy, who were treated like royalty, and the vulnerable, who were humiliated and pushed aside. A well-dressed man entered through the main doors and bypassed the entire line. The receptionist stood up immediately, her tone sweet and respectful. "Dr. Javier is expecting you. Please, right this way." No waiting, no questions, just privilege. Moments later, a single mother with a crying toddler approached Dr. Javier directly. "Please, doctor, my child has had a high fever for hours. He's not responding to medicine." Without even checking the child, Javier smirked. "He's not dying. Sit down and wait like everyone else." Her face turned pale. "But he's getting worse," she tried to explain. Javier leaned in slightly, his tone mocking. "If I had to stop for every kid with a sniffle, this hospital would shut down." The mother sat back down, crushed. Keanu's hands balled into fists. He glanced at the elderly man still clutching his chest beside him, ignored for over an hour. On the other side, the teenager with the hand wound sat silently, afraid to seek help again after being mocked. Meanwhile, the private patients kept flowing in. Some even greeted Dr. Javier like a celebrity. "Always good to see you, Doc." one businessman said, handing over a sleek envelope. Keanu had seen enough. This wasn't just poor management. This was a culture of cruelty. And the man at the center of it all was Dr. Javier. But what Javier didn't know was that among the nobodies he looked down on was the man who had built the very ground he stood on. And that man was no longer willing to stay silent. Keanu Reeves didn't need to raise his voice. He didn't need to announce who he was. Instead, he did what few powerful people ever do. He listened. For hours, he remained seated in the hospital's worn-out waiting area. Around him, the suffering continued. The elderly man beside him groaned softly, clearly in distress. Nurses passed by without a second glance. The mother with the feverish baby shifted in her seat, whispering comforting words to her child while holding back tears. Not once did Keanu complain. Not once did he reveal his identity. But every cruel word, every act of indifference, every skipped patient, he saw it all. He mentally recorded each injustice like a silent observer building a case. And as he watched, he noticed something else: fear. The staff, especially the nurses and receptionists, weren't just cold. They were nervous, intimidated. They moved around Dr. Javier like he was untouchable. No one dared question his actions, even when patients were suffering right in front of them. Keanu leaned back in his chair and watched as a young nurse hesitated near the elderly man. She glanced toward Dr. Javier, then turned away, pretending not to see. Fear had silenced compassion. Protocol had replaced humanity. At that moment, Keanu understood. This wasn't just one bad doctor. It was a culture of fear and favoritism, created and allowed to thrive because no one dared challenge it. He had built this hospital to be a refuge for the working class, the single mothers, the elderly, the sick who had nowhere else to go. But somehow, that dream had been corrupted. Still, he waited. He knew the moment to act hadn't come yet. He needed more, something that would make the truth undeniable. So he kept watching. He kept listening. He allowed the cruelty to unfold just a little longer, because soon he would expose it all. And when he did, no one in that hospital would ever forget the day Keanu Reeves stood up, not as a celebrity, but as a man who refused to stay silent in the face of injustice. After hours of observing the chaos from the waiting area, Keanu needed answers, not just from what he could see, but from the people working inside the system. He slipped away from the main corridor and quietly approached a break room where he heard muffled voices. The door was slightly ajar. Inside, a few nurses and support staff were speaking in hushed tones, unaware that a patient was listening just outside. He humiliated that teenager with the hand wound again. One nurse whispered bitterly. Another added, "Yeah, and the mother with the feverish baby?" He ignored her completely. A third voice, younger, more hesitant, chimed in. "We all know how bad he is, but no one can touch him. Management protects him because his numbers are the best." Keanu's eyes narrowed. That was the missing piece. Dr. Javier wasn't just a bad apple. He was backed by leadership. The system prioritized efficiency metrics over compassion. Javier rushed through consultations, skipped tests, and sent patients home without proper care, all to keep performance reports looking good. But the staff paid the price. The nurses feared retaliation if they spoke up. One said quietly, "If you complain, he'll cut your hours or make sure you get overnight shifts. He's done it before." Keanu pushed open the door gently, revealing himself. The room fell silent. The employees froze, unsure of who he was or what he'd heard. "I'm sorry to interrupt," Keanu said calmly, "but I heard everything, and I believe you." The staff looked at each other in confusion. "Who are you?" one of the nurses asked cautiously. Keanu gave a half smile. "Just someone who believes hospitals should treat people like human beings." Their faces softened. One nurse stepped forward. "Then you should know? This goes way beyond one doctor." Keanu nodded slowly, absorbing it all. "Thank you for your honesty." Now it was clear. To fix this, he wouldn't just remove one toxic figure. He would have to dismantle an entire structure built on fear and indifference. And he was ready. Keanu had seen enough. The humiliation of patients, the fear among the staff, and the cold indifference of the system. It all pointed to one thing. The hospital had lost its soul. And now, it was time to confront the people responsible. He walked to the front desk and calmly asked to speak with the hospital administrator. The security guard looked confused, unsure why a regular-looking patient would make such a request. But something in Keanu's tone, measured, unwavering, made him pick up the phone. Minutes later, Keanu was escorted into a conference room. Sitting at the head of the table was the administrator, a sharp-dressed man in his 50s, with graying hair and a clipped tone. "What's this about?" he asked impatiently. Keanu sat down, placed his hands on the table, and met the man's eyes. "My name is Keanu Reeves," he said clearly. "I'm the owner of this hospital." The room fell silent. The administrator blinked, stunned. One of the nurses gasped. "I came here today not as a celebrity," Keanu continued, "but as a man who believed this hospital stood for dignity, compassion, and care. What I've seen tonight is a complete betrayal of that mission." The administrator tried to recover. "Mr. Reeves, if we'd known you were coming..." "That's exactly the problem," Keanu cut in. "I shouldn't need to be recognized to receive decent treatment. No one should." He described everything he witnessed: the receptionist mocking patients, the neglect of the elderly man, the humiliation of a young boy, and the cruelty of Dr. Javier Fuentes. He spoke of the fear among the staff, the manipulation of schedules, and how performance metrics had become more important than human lives. "I'm not here to protect your numbers," Keanu said firmly. "I'm here to restore this place to what it was meant to be, a sanctuary for anyone in need." The administrator sat in stunned silence. "The reforms begin now," Keanu declared. And with that, the quiet man who had spent hours sitting in the waiting room stood up to change everything. Moments after Keanu Reeves revealed himself to be the hospital's owner, a heavy silence hung in the conference room. The administrator looked shaken. A nurse, standing in the corner, wiped away silent tears. But Keanu wasn't done. He turned to one of the security guards. "Please bring Dr. Javier Fuentes to this room, now." Within minutes, the doors swung open. Dr. Javier entered, clearly annoyed. "Why was I called in at this hour?" he demanded, not yet noticing Keanu. Then his eyes landed on the man sitting calmly at the head of the table. "Who is this?" he asked, voice sharp. The administrator hesitated, then replied, "He's the owner of the hospital." Color drained from Dr. Javier's face. Keanu stood, his voice calm but piercing. "I saw everything. How you dismissed a bleeding teenager, ignored a baby with a fever, mocked struggling patients. You've turned this hospital into your personal kingdom of cruelty. Javier tried to defend himself. I get results. My numbers. Keanu cut him off. You may have high numbers, but you failed the most important test, human decency. Without raising his voice, Keanu delivered the final blow. Effective immediately, you're fired, and if I ever hear of you treating patients like this again, I'll make sure you never work in medicine again. Security moved in. Javier tried to protest, but it was too late. Once he was gone, Keanu turned to the staff. The real work begins now. He outlined his plan for sweeping reform. A new, anonymous reporting system for staff and patients. Mandatory empathy and patient care training for all employees. A renewed mission. Every patient, regardless of income or appearance, must be treated with dignity. The room, once filled with fear, was now charged with hope. You're not alone anymore, Keanu said gently. We're going to rebuild this place, together. And with that, the hospital's transformation had begun, not just in policy, but in spirit. In the days that followed Keanu Reeves' courageous stand, the atmosphere inside the hospital began to shift. The cold, fearful silence that had once haunted the halls was slowly replaced by something new. Hope. The changes were immediate. Patients who had previously waited for hours without attention were now seen with care and respect. The receptionist, who once mocked people, was replaced with someone trained in compassion. Nurses who once feared retaliation were now speaking up freely, finally allowed to care for patients the way they always wanted to. Training sessions began for every employee, from senior doctors to janitorial staff, not on efficiency, but on empathy, on respect, and on how to truly listen. Every shift started with a meeting that reminded staff why they chose to work in healthcare in the first place. The teenage boy, who had been dismissed for a bleeding hand, was contacted and invited back. This time, treated quickly, professionally, and with kindness. The elderly man with chest pain was called in for a proper checkup and was found to have a heart condition that required follow-up treatment. And the mother, who had nearly given up hope on her feverish baby, she returned, nervous at first, but was met with warmth and urgency. Her baby was treated immediately. Staff morale soared. People no longer clocked in just for a paycheck. They showed up because they felt proud again, proud to serve, proud to belong. And Keanu? He kept a low profile. No press conferences, no cameras. He simply returned one evening, unannounced, walking the same hallways. Only this time, he saw smiling faces, gentle voices, and real healing taking place. As Keanu prepared to leave the hospital after his quiet inspection, a small voice stopped him. "Excuse me," the child said, tugging at his jacket. Keanu turned and looked down to see a 5-year-old boy with bright eyes and a shy smile. "Are you Keanu Reeves, the man who owns the hospital?" Keanu knelt beside him, smiled gently, and nodded. "Yes, I am." The boy looked up at him with admiration. "Thank you. The doctors are nice now." Keanu felt a lump form in his throat. He placed a hand on the boy's shoulder and said softly, "Taking care of people is what really matters." That one moment, simple yet powerful, said more than any speech or headline ever could. Keanu stood and turned to look at the hospital one more time. The building now glowed softly in the night, no longer just steel and concrete, but a place where dignity had been restored, where kindness was valued, and where people mattered more than numbers. He didn't need credit. He didn't need applause. His reward was in the transformation itself, in the lives being healed, the trust being rebuilt, and the hearts being touched. As he walked away, no cameras followed, just the quiet footsteps of a man who had seen injustice, stood against it, and reminded the world that compassion is the most powerful force of all. Keanu Reeves' fictional journey through his own hospital offers more than just an emotional narrative. It delivers a powerful lesson that resonates deeply with the world we live in today. In a time where systems often value numbers over people, speed over sincerity, and appearance over character, Keanu's silent observation reminds us of the power of presence. He didn't barge in with fame or authority. He listened, he looked, he cared. And that's the first lesson. Real change begins when we stop to truly see others, not just their problems, but their humanity. His story also speaks to a challenge many of us face daily: standing up to injustice when it's inconvenient. It's easy to stay quiet when we see something wrong. It's safer. But silence protects corruption. Whether it's in our workplace, school, or even family, being the person who speaks up, who shows kindness when others don't. That's where integrity is born. Another crucial takeaway is that empathy is not weakness, it's leadership. Keanu didn't shout, threaten, or seek revenge. He led with calm strength and set an example that others wanted to follow. In our own lives, especially in moments of conflict, it's easy to react with anger. But the most transformative power often lies in quiet dignity and thoughtful action. Finally, the story reminds us that no one is too small to matter. Whether it's a janitor, a receptionist, or a patient with no insurance, everyone deserves to be treated with respect. You don't need to be rich, famous, or powerful to make a difference. Start by showing kindness. Advocate for someone who can't speak for themselves. Look for the overlooked. Help without expecting credit. Because in the end, it's not who you are in the espo,